Hi there, my name is Peter Taylor. I am also known as the Lazy Project Manager, and I welcome you to this session. I've been in project management for way too many years probably, but I've learned a lot the hard way in many cases, and I wanted to share with you in this session some thoughts and some insights into my world of project management and see how that fits with your world of being personal and executive assistants. So welcome. In this session, what I want to do is explore some real world experiences, and I'm doing that with the help of two senior executive assistants and an executive who know this world. I mean, it's I want to make sure it is really relevant to your world, the world of the assistant, the executive assistant, the personal assistant. So I want to talk about what it means to be a project manager in your world, and I'm going to look at it in three areas. First of all, how can project management help you be more successful in what you are doing on a day-to-day basis? And then we'll talk about busting through the jargon. I mean, every element of business has jargon to it, and project management is no different. So I want to talk about project management for everyone. I want to keep it as simple as possible, and also look at kind of what tools could actually be useful to you. What sort of techniques might be relevant to the world of your projects, and we'll talk about what we mean by projects in the world of the assistant. I'm also going to be drawing on my own experiences as detailed in my book, The Lazy Project Manager, which is all about working smarter and not harder. It's about applying some of those key rules to life, such as the 80-20 rule. We'll explore that towards the end of the session. But my aim for you is that your projects, as I said, we will talk about what that really means in your world, projects. My aim is that after this session, your projects should be a little less stressful than perhaps they have been to date. But let's start with a good question. What is a project anyway? And we're going to do that by driving into some of the basics. Let's start by hearing from one of those real world EAs about what it really means to be an executive assistant.
So the EA role for me, as I'm sure for many people, is not about just number crunching or filling diaries. It's more about being proactive and seeing what's going to be happening, what's going to come up, how that should be placed and prepared for. Basically elevating the role away from the term secretarial or administrative, but actually making an impactful difference to the business and partnering your exec on that.
So we heard there about being proactive, which is very much what project management is focused on, being prepared. All good project managers think a lot about consequences and planning for possibilities, a whole variety of possibilities that may or may not happen during their project delivery. We heard about the elevation of the role, and I think project management skills can play an important part to this approach, this elevation. And finally, being of a positive impact is really, again, it's about project management, it's about project leadership, it's about guiding and directing and controlling to a degree, as much as possible, of course, the direction of the project, but doing that in a very positive way. So what is a project? Well, here's one definition for you. This is the definition from the Project Management Institute, PMI, and it talks about a project can be defined as a temporary endeavour undertaken to create a unique product or service. And I think key there is it's a temporary endeavour. If this is something you do on a regular basis, this is a process, this is an operation, this is something regular. I mean, you might, might consider actually doing your executive's expenses every month as a project in some ways, but it's something you do every month, and therefore it is a repeatable process. So, I think in the assistant world, there are perhaps two types of projects. The first one is the project of keeping their executive supported in their needs, and whilst a degree of that is repetitive activities, travel, etc., the reality is it's a project in the sense it is variable from day to day, from week to week, and it changes. And I think the second thing is it's events. So the first one, keeping the executive supported. If it's not cat herding, then it's certainly juggling skills of a very significant level. And in the area of the second one, the events, this is all about the kind of the discrete things, the preparation, the management, the administration, the attendance, for such events like quarterly business reviews, like mid-years, like operation reviews, like social activities, perhaps visiting senior executives, visiting clients, team activities. It's all about venues and registrations and hotels and attendance and all that kind of thing. So I think when I talk about projects in the world of assistance, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And you may well come up with some other ones as well. But I think the principles of what we're going to be talking about will be the same. Now, bear with me just during this next section, because I think there's a lot of language that you might hear in the world of projects, and I just want to offer some, as ever, very simple explanations from my point of view. So there's a number. Yeah, the project management loves the letter P. So you'll probably hear things about your project, or you hear things about program, you hear things about portfolio, and you might even hear something called a PMO. I just want to explain quickly. These may or may not be relevant to you. You may or may not recognize these inside your own organization, but it's useful to understand. So a project is, as we described, that kind of temporary endeavor. But as far as I'm concerned, project and project management is just doing something the right way. I mean, that's all it is. It's about bringing about the best possible outcome whilst this project is underway. So projects are about doing it the right way. You may hear program, and program is not a big project. It's different. A program is typically made up of a number of projects that can be sequential, can be parallel and interrelated and quite complex. But a program is just doing it in the right order. It's doing all of those projects in the right order. That's my view. You may also hear portfolio, and a portfolio, mostly commonly heard in the sort of the area of a financial portfolio. You might have a portfolio of clients in your organization, for example, but a portfolio as far as projects are concerned is just doing the right things for an organization. So if an organization has a portfolio of projects, they all should in some way, directly and indirectly, connect to the strategy of that organization. And the last P is the PMO. The P in the PMO can even stand for project or program or portfolio. It's a very confusing thing. But all it is this is the kind of central management office, typically a small group of people who support projects inside an organization. And really, as far as I'm concerned, the PMO is just doing it with the right team. It's about the right people supporting the organization to do the right projects in the right way, in the right order, to do the right things. And effectively, in the world of assistance, I mean, you're kind of all of these things in one. You are effectively the project office to support yourself and the business. You are doing projects. You might even be doing some very complex things. If you're doing a major event for your organization, you could almost say that is borderline a program. And if you put everything you do together through the entire year, then you are running a portfolio of activities. So I just thought it was useful to just think and consider that, to give you some simple insight. I mean, my approach is always, it is the KISS approach. It is keep it simple as much as possible. There are much longer and more complex explanations to these things, absolutely. But for now, I think that is enough. So, back to projects. Let's talk about the structure of a project. Now, there are many ways to describe the structure of a project, but again, following my pattern, keeping it as simple as possible, let's just stick to 3. For a project, you plan it, you run it, and you close it. It's that simple. You just connect those 3 things together. Easy, right? It's what's to be worried about at all. Now, the background to this, and we'll go into more detail on what we mean by plan, what we mean by run, what we mean by close in just a moment. But the other complexity to this is that there are 3 worlds out there. There are typically 3 coexisting environments inside your organization. I would suggest there is business as usual. This is what you do. This is what your organization is about. This is why you are in existence, for profit or for delivery of a service, if it's a charitable status, or if it's a function, if you like, if it's a government activity. You have something you do as an organization which is business as usual. There will also be inside that organization, and there's no doubt that as is absolutely the case, you will have projects as projects. There will be some big, scary, hairy, meaty creations of change going on inside your organization. It depends which industry you're in, as to how much of it is. I mean, I worked with an organization not too long ago where over 60% of their business effectively was project based. There was a huge amount of change going on. So projects as usual, and these will be run by if you like, meat-eating bastard project managers, whatever you want to call them. But these are professional project managers, full-time, working on driving this change inside your organization. But then there is the world of projects as usual, and this is the interesting world. This I think is your world. This is a world where you undertake the delivery of change, of delivery of these kind of temporary endeavors, bringing about profitable changes to your organization as part of your day-to-day work. You are not dedicated project managers, and there are other people in your organization who do this who are not dedicated project managers. You just do it as part of your job. So you've got business as usual, you've got projects as projects, and then I think there is your world, which is projects as usual, stuff you just have to do as part of the day job. Okay, part one, phase one, first part of the structure of a project, plan. You plan in the following ways, typically. The first is really you've got to define the reason for the project in the first place. Why are you doing this? Now, that can be very light, very simple. It could be a direction from one of your executives, perhaps. But there is a reason for doing a project, and behind that reason is probably more detailed than you may necessarily come across, etc. I mean, in the world of real projects as projects, then you would have quite a robust business case justification for doing something, a lot of detail and information to actually define the purpose of the project itself. But you're going to have something. There is a reason for doing it. The second part is really capturing the scope and the expectations. Why are you doing this? We now know that, but okay, well, what are we doing? Because it's very simple to say we're going to do X, Y, Z, whatever it may be. But all right, well, what does that actually mean? Who's involved? What's the scale for this? What's the scope of this? What's the timeline for this? What is the expected outcomes? That's really important. The more you can understand that, and this is the area of asking all of those questions about, well, okay, you want this, but you want it by when, and who's it got to cover, and who's got to be involved, and who are the decision makers, and who will have the final say, and what if people disagree, and are we going externally for these resources? Are we using them internally? Are we using external rooms, internal rooms? Are we bringing food in? I'm talking in some examples here, but this is all about capturing the scope. And what is the expectation here? What is the preparation for expectation management? It's not an open-ended thing. Some of the trouble that people get into here is that they're given something to do, and there are not enough questions asked. I mean, respectful questions, not overly challenging, but clarity of what is required is really, really important. And then once you've got that, you can then estimate the time and resources to do this. I mean, it may be that you can handle everything, but if that's the case, that handling everything from your point of view has got to sit on top of you doing all the other stuff that you do on a Monday to Friday basis, or perhaps even sometimes into the weekend. So, even if it's just your time and therefore you are the sole resource, it has an impact on everything else that's going on. So estimating that time, estimating resources, and then developing a plan. Again, I mean, if you've ever seen some project management plans, they can be incredibly detailed, of course, and I'm not suggesting that you actually put anything like this together, but just even a very simple plan. It can even be, a simple, one-page bullet pointed, structure of what's going to happen in what sequence. I mean, that's still a plan. But if you just launch straight into things in the areas of projects, then it can run away with you. You can get out of control very quickly. So the structure of a project is define the reason for the project, capture that scope and expectations, estimate the time and resources, and then develop that plan. That's the way it kind of works, and that's the way it has to work. Okay, great. We've planned. Now all we have to do is run the project, make it happen. Really, this is the part from the start to the finish, if you like, of the deliverable of the project. So your job is to lead and motivate. Maybe that's just talking to yourself occasionally if you're doing all this on your own, but if there's other people involved, it is important to take that kind of leadership role and to motivate people and to encourage them. What are we trying to do? What is the purpose? What's the value? This is going to be really good. I value your help. All those kind of things come under that banner of leading and motivating. And then you've got to manage risks and issues and changes. It's almost certain that there's going to be some risks. It's guaranteed there'll be risks. Change, which is what the project is, change has by default risks. It is disrupting the normal activity. If everything was never changing, if there was no projects out there that would just be general operation day to day, ticking over. Everybody knows what they're doing, and it's very repetitive and very robotic. Change brings about disruption, and people are uncomfortable with change, particularly, and they've probably got their own, no, they probably won't. They definitely will rather have their own work to do, their own priorities, etc. So on top of this, you have to manage the risks, and if any of those risks become true issues, then you have to deal with that, and you have to be ready for changes. I don't have to tell you guys about changes, because I imagine your entire life is built on change, because that's the nature of the executive support world. You have to monitor progress. Yeah, how are you getting on with this? Because you need to know that for yourself, but also other people will probably come to you and go, well, how's it going? Are we nearly there? Is it going to be on time? Is this going to happen? If there's a budget related to what you're doing, then you have to manage the budget. And you've got to communicate. You have to maintain communications with all of the stakeholders. And those stakeholders will obviously be your executives, but there may well be other people inside the organization, particularly when it comes to the kind of bigger stuff, the events, etc. Then there will be stakeholders. And you need to think about your stakeholders in a way that ensures that nobody's missed out. And you need to think about the quality of your communication to make sure what you are talking about is understood, received, and is correct and accurate and of a high quality, and we'll talk about that shortly. And finally, we get to the end of the project. This is the close. This is where you wrap up the project in a controlled way. You don't just stop or forget about it. You do it in a controlled way. You learn and share lessons and experiences, even if it's just with yourself. And then celebrate. I mean, why not? It just depends what we're talking about here, but it's got to be worth at least a cup of coffee or tea or something like that. Celebrate in the appropriate way that's relevant to what you've just undertaken. This is the way that you finish off a project in a constructive and controlled way that brings about value. And we will talk again. This is kind of a key area, particularly in the area of lessons learned and experiences gathered. Okay, so we've talked about the structure of the project, but now we're going to look at some of the key project activities. We don't have time to cover everything, but I picked a number of these 6 key areas that I think it's worth taking a closer look. Right, these are the ones I want to cover, and I picked them because I think they are ones that will, if you put a little focus to these are going to bring you the greatest return on the investment of your time. So the first one is scope, understanding what it is you are actually doing as far as this project is concerned. Risk is critical, understanding or anticipating risk and planning for risk. Then there is communication. I mean, the heart of everything that you do really is communication, and I'm sure you are really good at that, but it is an area that, particularly when it comes to project, is critical. Change, the disruption of change, whatever you set out to do at the start of this project is almost certainly going to be something slightly different that you deliver at the end, because change is the reality of the landscape of the business world. There's prioritization, and also there's finally lessons learned. I talked about this as a valuable final stage of a project. So this we're going to cover, these 6 key areas we're going to cover in some detail. So starting off with scope, I think when it comes to scope, let's hear now from one of an executive who has benefited from working with some great EAs in the past. Let's start there, and then we'll look at what we mean by scope and scope management.
I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with a few EAs in my time, and a lot of the EAs are part of teams who support a team of executives, and it's interesting that the EAs I've worked with got a lot of different skills, a lot of diversity, which I really valued, and a lot of the executives have different needs. Some are not very self-sufficient, some are very independent, and I think it's helpful in that sort of team environment for the EAs and executive one-on-one talk about what the scope of work will be, so that they can basically bring to that working relationship the best of what they do. And I think if you have that conversation early on in the relationship, it really helps.
Here we heard the real world of the different needs from executives, and many assistants work for not just one person but for multiple people these days. That's something we have to recognise. And therefore the value of understanding the scope of work is critical, because misunderstandings just waste time. They just really waste time. Now, this is a kind of typical visualization of scope management and control, because you have to balance these things all the time. In the world of project management, it's referred to as the iron triangle, the triple constraint. It basically, you have to balance time against cost, against quality, and all around this is the scope of what you're trying to deliver. So perhaps in the admin world, perhaps the now is the most important thing, because typically executives go, I want it and I want it by tomorrow or the day after. But more and more organizations are kind of drawn towards smart spending, if you like, and an EA or an assistant can impact this a great deal. So the costs that you kind of overseeing your work, around travel, about event booking, about equipment, about entertainment, about lunches, dinners, etc. I mean, these are all reasonably significant costs to an organization. So if you look at that kind of those three balancing points, you as far as a project is concerned, it's about getting it right, and you need to deliver a certain scope, and obviously you need to deliver at a high quality. That's really important. But there is a balance. You could do it faster, but it might well cost more. Perhaps you have to use external resources, etc. Maybe you just have to, not wait for a meeting room. You go outside and take that meeting room. These are all things you constantly balance when it comes to projects. You could do it slower, and you might be able to save costs, but actually it may not deliver it to the point in time the organisation, your executives require it to be done. So, scope is a balancing act. Scope management is a balancing act. First, you need to understand what it is you are doing. That's why it's really important that there are, if you like, no surprises. You understand the scope, the remit of what you're trying to do, and then you kind of balance that. You balance it to make sure it is delivered to the right quality at the right time, to a point of success in the organization. So scope management is a very, very important part of projects and project management. So now let's look at risk. And as I've said, projects by their very nature are risky. Maybe you're doing projects that are very, very low risks, but the project managers who run those big, hairy, scary creations of change inside organizations are running very high risk. But the idea is, of course, that the return on investment of that change, of taking that risk, is far more than doing nothing at all. But as a project owner, project leader, project manager, you do need to think about the risks that you might well be facing in what it is you're trying to deliver, because part of this is really much of understanding what possible risks there may be, and considering and being prepared for, if those risks actually happen, if they turn into issues, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to deal with them? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to recover? How are you going to manage those specific risks that have now happened and turned into issues? So everything carries a risk. This is a critical part of anyone's role, anticipating and preparing for that risk. So what does a senior executive assistant feel about the role and risk?
It's also about risk management. An EA who knows her executives and their preferences can arrange travel, for example. What's their favourite airline? What's their favourite hotel? Do they prefer car hire over car service? They'll plan interactions to maximise the executive's time. Can they take the urgent call in the car whilst on the way to the airport? Also being able to suggest that due to, for example, the weather, that they change their normal routine. And of course, always being ready to react immediately to unforeseen circumstances.
So their risk was acknowledged as part of the role very clearly, and this is matched by the subject matter expertise that any assistant will have of their executives and their business. But risk is a clever combination of buffering or contingency together with the optimization of time. An executive assistant, a personal assistant, is all about supporting their executives to make them as productive as possible whilst minimizing risk and disruption. So it's a really tough challenge, and one thousands of assistants achieve on a daily basis. So with risk, I think you probably get my meaning for this visual representation here, as I won't actually describe it, but I think it's important to understand risk versus issue as a kind of final point in the area of risk. A risk is something that may happen, an issue is something that has happened. Risk management is about considering what might happen and having some plans in place for should they actually occur. Issue management is about enacting those plans. Oh goodness me, this problem has happened, it's a real thing, I'm now going to do the following to resolve it. In the world of project management, there is kind of a humorous commentary around this. So, and trust me, project managers can be fun. Okay, can be fun people. So a risk is something nasty you smell, and an issue is something nasty you've trodden in. The first thing is being prepared for what might happen. The second part is consider what you're going to do if it does happen. The third part is enact those plans if it does happen. So, for example, and I'm using a very simplistic example here, your executive has got to get to London or a city, wherever it is, then they're planning to catch the train. A risk might be what happens if that train is cancelled, and the executive cannot make it to the meeting. I said it's a very simplistic example, but if you think about risks, there's two things. It's not just a kind of binary, will it happen, won't it happen? It is, if it happens, what's the likelihood of it happening? And if it does happen, what's the impact of it happening? This is the way risk is managed. So here we are. I mean, the chances of this train actually being completely cancelled is probably pretty low. The impact, however, will be very high. Perhaps it's a very important client meeting. The possibility of that train being late is probably high, particularly if you're in the UK, and the impact may be, of it being late might be medium to high. I mean, you'd make a judgment call. I mean, if it's 15 minutes late, does that really matter? If it's an hour late, that could really matter. So your risk is looking at this kind of thing, going, well, okay, what's the likelihood of something happening, and if it does happen, what's the impact of it happening, and therefore what contingency will I put in place to begin with? Maybe catch an earlier train, maybe get the executive to go get a car for the executive, for example, because it is so important that they get there. But then, hey, you've got another risk. What happens if there's traffic jams and an accident, etc.? It's never that simple. So you define the risk, anticipate the risk, you consider contingency, what can you do about it, catching an earlier train, getting up the night before, whatever it may be. And the second part is, if it does happen, what are you going to do about it? If the executive is actually at the station or at the airport and the plane is cancelled, the train is cancelled, what's the alternative plans? Different airline, different approach, different way of getting there, etc. This is the world of risk and risk management. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at communication now. Communication are the next of the 6 key areas. And again, I'm going to go and we're going to listen to a senior executive assistant talk about communication and the importance of communication to kick this off.
EAs are in many ways the public face of the executives that they represent. Therefore, all communication and output needs to be of the highest quality, anticipating the needs of the business and the executives themselves, leaving them free to act as the leaders of the organisation.
So there you have it, the public face of their executives. It's a critical role. You knew that anyway, didn't you? But there we heard that quality of communication is key to helping these business leaders be successful in their roles. So, communication. There's so much you can read about communication, and we spend so much time communicating. There are books and so much about communication that you can research if you really want to. But here's my simple guidance. This is the kind of level I kind of talk about when I do communication training and support organizations through workshops and so forth. Communication is about providing the right information to the right person at the right time in the right way. You have to get all 4 of those right. Otherwise, you have not communicated successfully. You can give the right information to the right person in the right way at the wrong time. They won't have listened to you. You know that. You go and try and talk to your executives when they're right in the middle of a rapid flight to the next meeting or whatever it may be, or they're focused on something else and critical. You know yourselves that they will not listen. You know it works the other way around as well. You can provide the right information at the right time in the right way, but give it to the wrong person. Well, what have you achieved? Absolutely nothing. So you have to get all 4 of these correct. Right information, right person, right time, right way. That is the only way that communication works in a successful way. And then there's the kind of considering success points, particularly in the world, and I just quickly touch on this. This is the world of globalization. This is the world of working with virtual resources around the world. If you're an executive assistant or a personal assistant and you're working with multiple offices in multi countries, this is kind of the challenges you face when it comes to communication. You've got to respect time. You know this, time differences, the fact that you're talking to, maybe you're based in Europe and you're talking to someone in Australia and you're talking to someone in North America, etc. The time differences, particularly if you're having like a group call or a team call or whatever it may be, everybody is working at that different time zones, and therefore they're different sort of, personal daily biorhythms, etc. So you have to respect that time. You have to take that into consideration, that people might be staying up late or taking a very early call, and we're all different, and when the periods of times we are most productive and most effective at work. So respect time, respect language, of course. I mean, again, and I do most of my work in with English-speaking people around the world, but I know that for the most part that is not their primary language, and therefore you have to consider that. Consider the fact that they are processing their language, their native language, into English, into the business language of the world usually, then that takes some effort, and there can be levels of misunderstanding. And respect their views. I mean, again, it's about cultural things. You know, you've got to think about all of these things when it comes to communication. It's not so simple as talking to someone who's sitting next to you in the office or just down the corridor. You have to consider about time, language, and their views. Which brings us nicely on to change, the existence and almost certainty of change in everything you do. You're bringing about change through the projects, but each and every one of those projects will be impacted by change at some point. And so it's critical to manage change. Change is constant. The old joke is that change is inevitable except from a vending machine. I guess that doesn't really exist today with the kind of smart payment methods we have, but it is a certainty. Change is constant. Our organisations are changing, the people we work with and work for are changing, the strategy of organisations is changing, the business environment is changing, and inside those organisations, projects are bringing about change. So, I mean, change can be a significant area in the world of projects and project delivery and project management. I'm not suggesting that you need to get into this kind of level, but if you think about it, and let me just talk for a moment from the world of project management, projects as projects, I mean, there is always a defined process for change. There is also, if someone suggests a change in a project, there is a formalized process for logging that change, for assessing that change, for registering that change, to then moving forward to some kind of review process, then an approval or rejection path. Who does that, what authority levels, what complexity of change, what value of change, that can depend. And then, based on changes being approved, there are actions to make that change come about. And, change can be positive, it can be negative. Change can happen because the scope changes at some point. Change can happen because of disruption from outside or even inside the project itself sometimes. And change will come about because you see opportunities to deliver more than you originally anticipated. So, change is good, but change is challenging. I think the important thing I would say as far as the world of the assistant is that you need to just think about change. The challenge is always to be subservient to change. So just, you're asked to do A, B, C, and then suddenly, halfway through that, you're asked to do D and possibly E, and somebody else wants F, and you just, if you blindly accept it, that is a challenge, because you're increasing or complexing the scope of what it is you're trying to deliver constantly, and in that that inevitably leads to a point of failure. It's almost a point of there is a technique called available to promise, which is, well, yes, and if you remember that the kind of triple constraints, the time, the cost, and the quality, the wrapping around of the scope. If you keep saying yes, then there's going to be a problem. Therefore, there is the value in at some point going, well, yes, you can, but there's a consequence. There is, I can deliver what you want by next Friday, or I can deliver what you're now asking me for, but it isn't going to be next Friday. It's going to take another 2 or 3 days, or something like that. It's a concept available to promise. So I think it's key in the area of change is that adopt the change. Don't resist the change. Don't be difficult. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting there is some sort of tracking, some sort of audit of big change impacts to the things that you're doing, so it's very, very clear why things may be later, maybe cost more, etc. And it's something you need to really roll into your communication to your key stakeholder, which is of course your executives. And what comes next is prioritization. On the subject of prioritization, what does an executive think is important for assistants?
Thinking about EAs in teams, working for execs in teams, one of the other challenges I've seen is one of workload. Everyone's so busy, and the EAs will often struggle with conflicting demands from the range of executives. That's where prioritization comes in, and I think it's very important for EAs to lay out on the table for their execs all the things they're doing and really ask for help to get that work prioritized. They can come with their proposals, but it requires a business context to say what should we drop and what should we keep going with, and often the EAs try and do it all, and that's, God bless them, but it's not going to work that in the long term.
So we have to recognise conflict from multiple executives, multiple stakeholders, multiple inputs or drivers, perhaps other parts of the business that lean on an EA's experience and time, with the advice to be transparent and offer visibility that the collective executive may well be unaware of. It has to be said. I mean, sometimes an EA or a personal assistant that works for multiple executives will have some insight that even the executives don't realise, because they don't necessarily talk to each other about these things. So the last point was, don't try and do it all. No matter how much you want to, ask for help as needed. Now, this is an interesting thing. I think the very word priority. The very word priority is a conflict, because when the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s, it was singular. What did it mean? The very first or prior thing. It continued to have that useful definition for the next 500 years. However, in the 1900s, we pluralized the term and started speaking of priorities, multiple. But can we really have many first or prior things? It's an interesting thought. So what is important? This is Stephen Covey talking in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think everybody knows this book. The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. There you go. Interesting insight, but it's a very important one as well. And I want to share with you a simple tool that I've used in the past, right? And I try and share this with people when they're challenged by multiple demands on their time. So let's just have a quick look at this. The key to it really is to list things you have to do, short description, but it's a combination of the impact and the importance. Because the way it works is this. I'm going to use a project-based example, so bear with me on this one, but you'll get the idea. Let's say we have got a number of things to do, and you can see here we need to arrange the next team event. It's overdue. We need to reschedule a meeting with a supplier. We need to post the latest blog on project site. We've got to review the notes for a steering meeting. We've got to respond to requests to speak at an event, perhaps. Now, it's an example from my world, but you can make this your own. I've ranked them here in the sequence they came in. So the oldest one is the team event, which is overdue. That was the first one that came in, and the last one was a request to speak at an event. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That clearly is not their importance. It's not the priority, if you like. So let's look at this one. Let's look at the importance of this. So arrange the next team event, overdue. It's pretty important. I'm giving that an 8 out of 10. And this, whatever scoring system works for you. But I'm going score out of 10. So 8, it's pretty high. Reschedule the meeting with supplier, midpoint. Nothing, kind of important, but not that important. So I'm going to give that a 5, right in the middle. The latest blog post on Project Life, well, less important. It's number 4. The notes for steering meeting, well, goodness me, that steering meeting is not too far away, therefore it's very important. That's a 9. And respond to request to speak at an event. That is number 8. So now we've got a new ranking. We see number 1 is the 4th one, the review notes for steering meeting. We have a joint second place for the team event and the speaking. We then have the other 2 listed, 4 and 5. So that's the importance. Now let's look at them on impact. What if we don't do it? Well, if I don't arrange the next team event, people have been pretty upset about that. I mean, I'm going to go for an 8. Reschedule a meeting with supplier. Well, supplier's a supplier, I suppose, but maybe that's a bit brutal, but I'm sticking that with a 5. The blog post, not too important. Midpoint again, 5. Steering meeting, the impact is, well, I'm going to walk into a meeting unprepared, which is never that good, so I'm giving that an 8. Request to speak at an event, really not impactful really, so I'm going to give that a pretty low 3. So now we have another ranking. In joint first place is the steering meeting and the team event. Then we have the meeting with the supplier and the blog, and finally we have the request to speak. Now do the magic. What if you combine importance and impact? So you multiply them together to create a combined score. When something is highly important and highly impactful, it ranks extremely highly. And here we can see I've done that. I've put those 2 scores together and I have a brand new ranking where it is all about the steering meeting, it's all about the team event, and then moving on to supplier, the request to speak, and the project site. So you can see, using this kind of technique, things keep changing. It's based on your thought processes, and I don't think just because it's the oldest doesn't mean it's the most important. It may do, but it's not necessarily most important. I mean, why hasn't it been done if it's really important? And secondly, what's the impact of not doing it? And this is what we get out of this. This is you kind of see there's kind of two groupings of ranked activities here, two high ones and three low ones. And potential actions here, and this is an exercise I use in one of my workshops, could be to delegate low ones to someone else in the team who would enjoy the exposure of writing a project blog, for example. Is there someone else on the team who might be a good presenter who could speak at the next event? I said, move this into your world, into what it is that you deal with, but you get the idea, hopefully. And for the high level items, can you get some help? Can someone review the steering meeting notes for you? An objective view often helps, for example. What about next team event? Overdue? So why not find someone else who might be really enjoy putting that event together, perhaps with a lower level of your personal involvement. So I hope you can see this kind of balancing of importance and impact really helps you look at your priorities and make decisions accordingly. I understand your world, everything is expected of you. You're supposed to do magic, but the reality is you can't, and it's important you don't overstretch yourself, and it's important that you prioritize in the right way. Which brings us to the last of the key areas I want to look at, which is lessons learned. This is part of the project closure activity. Lessons learned is one of the most challenging because we just lurch, we just move on to the next thing, and we so often do not deal with the understanding of what worked and what didn't work, what we want to repeat, what we don't want to repeat, and how we can make things better in the future. Because I know it, we're all so very, very busy. I mean, just look at this. I'm sure it makes you smile. I'm sure it makes you reflect on your own organization. I'm sure it makes you think, that's life. That's my life. And why is it like that? Why do we never ever learn? The interesting thing is, we exist because of unbelievable evolution, if you go down that route, but we have achieved unbelievable things, and yet you can always go back to the black marker pen, the marker pen that sits in the meeting room that someone picks up and has run out, and they know it's run out, and they complain about it running out, and then they put it back on the little tray at the bottom of the whiteboard, easel, or where it may be, and leave it there. And then next meeting someone picks it up and does exactly the same thing. Sometimes, and I've done it, I've even picked up the same pen myself and realized that, that was embarrassing. We don't seem to learn, throw it in the bin, go and get a new one. But it's this stupid example of the fact that sometimes we really struggle to learn. Now this next slide is, this is a wonderful statement, if you like, from Donald Rumsfeld about talking about known knowns, unknown knowns, known unknowns, and any combination of knowns and unknowns that you could possibly want. The point about it actually makes sense. If you put it into a simple sort of quadrant or Boston matrix, then it makes sense. There is no way that you necessarily know everything that went on during a project delivery, during an event activity, or anything like that. There are things that went on that you really should understand, and the approach of learning lessons is all about that. There's a definition of insanity. I mean, insanity means doing the same thing you did in the past but expecting different results. Why would you? If you just run across the office right now and walk, bash your head into a wall and it hurts, if you were to turn around and do it again 5 minutes later, why would you be surprised it doesn't not hurt? I mean, in fact, it's gonna hurt you yet again. I'm not suggesting you do that, by the way. Please do not run at the wall. I'm definitely not encouraging you to do that. But my point is, if something didn't work last time, you want to change it so that hopefully next time it does work, and that really is the essence. One of the things I love is a concept of a retrospective. Regardless of what you discover, you just kind of reach out to people and go, how did it go? This happens. Feedback from your executives, feedback from your stakeholders, feedback from your colleagues, feedback from your peers. Then we kind of look at the 5 key questions. What worked well that you don't want to forget? It was successful. Let's repeat it next time. In the world of project management, this is the makings of methodology. What should you do differently next time? This is the learning experience. What still confuses you? You need to talk more about. What do you need to discuss in greater detail after a retrospective? Now, a retrospective in a project world can be, it can be a whole day. And I'm not suggesting you're going to do that, but at the very least, a brief meeting, even if it's a half an hour consideration of a major project activity, is valuable to identify what do we learn, because we really must learn. We really must learn in order to be more effective in the future. And why do you do this? Because you want to be better. You want to learn. You do not want to be this sort of project manager, an organizational leader dedicated to the imposition of order upon chaos, even if chaos is perfectly happy with the status quo. The other thing that we talk about in project management is project manager is a verb, not a noun. It's a doing word. You have to be active as a project manager. And let's just wrap this one up with hearing from a senior EA about the final point of the value of being proactive.
So the thing I rant and rave about the most is probably proactivity. We all know that we could sit there and coast and be told what to do, but actually the reality is to be a really effective executive consultant is to be proactive, to see the next step, to understand what your manager may want or need, to have proactively gone out and found out that information, to brief them, from little things all the way from travel arrangements all the way through to have they got bios for all of the people that they're going to be meeting necessarily or expected to sit next to at that table at dinner. But being proactive and making sure you've gone out and made sure that they're fully prepared for that role.
There you have it. It's all about action and not passivity. It's about being, and we heard this very loudly and very clearly, you've got to be proactive, you've got to anticipate, you've got to be prepared, and you have to be prepared for your executives. No surprises. That's the key. Which brings us on to the world of being productively lazy. I just want to wrap up this session with a couple of key points from my thoughts and my work of being the lazy project manager, the book The Lazy Project Manager. Let's start with this one. You know, this was a great quote from Robert Hyland, who talked about progress isn't made by early risers, it's made by lazy men trying to find easier ways to do something. Now, obviously, lazy people. I mean, that was a quote of its time. But that, you know, it's an important thing. It is, you know, it's not the people who get up early necessarily. It's people who find the most efficient and effective way to work. That is what's really critical. So being productively lazy is all about. It's working smarter, not harder. It's being effective in what you do. I'm going to kick off with what I call the science of laziness. This is about the Pareto Principle that was suggested by management thinker Joseph M. Duran, but it's based on the work of the Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto. And he observed that 80% of the property in Italy was owned by 20% of the Italian population. This was many years ago. But I don't suppose that ratio has changed too much. But Joseph Duran took that and evolved it into a number of principles. But the one we all quote is the 80-20 rule. For example, you know, the chances are that your company will probably earn, if it's into kind of production, selling, etc., the chances are it will probably earn 80% of its revenue from 20% of its client base, or perhaps 20% of its product line. I mean, Microsoft, for example, 20% of their products deliver 80% of their revenue. This is the principle of the 80-20 rule. In our personal lives, for example, we will achieve, you know, 80% of our achievements, our successes, our progress by 20% of our effort that we put in. So the idea behind this is that, you know, what I say to people is that, you know, think about this. It comes back to that kind of prioritization we talked about earlier on. But, you know, on the way to work, in the car, on the train, on the bus, over that first cup of coffee, you need to think about your day. What is it you're trying to do today? And, you know, what are the priorities, and, you know, what is the 20% that's going to deliver 80% of benefit, 80% of return on your personal investment? Now, look, I get it. I recognize, perhaps more than anybody in the business world, that you guys are impacted by the whims, the desires, the requests of your executives. You know, your day can change in a moment. I get that. But it doesn't stop you thinking about it, you know, based on ignoring the kind of disruptions that come your way. And it's one of the great skills of assistants out there, that they manage, smiling, politely managing those kind of constant disruptions. But what is it that you're going to do? Think about it. As I said, think about it at the start of the day. What are the important things you need to achieve today that's going to deliver you that kind of 80%, that personal return on investment, that's going to make you feel better? This is the kind of way things, you know, this works, because if you just go through your to-do list and then you're ticking things off, and they may not be very important, you may go for the easy ones, you might go for the older ones. You know, we saw that on the kind of combination of importance and impact. But by prioritizing, it allows you to, you know, get to the point of success, and you know, we feel energized by success. That's just the way it is. Get something done, feel really good. You can actually achieve even more. It's a kind of, you know, it's kind of it's a momentum that happens. So the science of laziness is all about that. It's considering what's really important in your working day and focusing on that and making that kind of progress. It's important to reflect and consider and not just roll into the next day and just take what's coming, because that way you're at the whim of everybody else, and you're not going to be successful that way. Which brings us on to the second thing I want to talk about, which is the intelligence of laziness. This is a wonderful character from history, Helmuth Karl Bernhard Graf von Moltke. Moltke was the Field Marshal of the Prussian army at the end of the 19th century. He and then his son after him evolved the Prussian army into one of the most successful military forces the world has ever seen. And a lot of the things that they did in structuring the military army that they had is still relevant today around the world. But one of the things they did, and I do like this, is that they very simply looked at the people they had in their armies. And they said people are they're either not smart or smart. In fact, they didn't say not smart. They were pretty brutal about it. But they categorized people on these two ends of a spectrum. And they also said people are either lazy or diligent. And so it's kind of interesting the insight they had, because they looked at their people and they said, well, look, if someone is lazy and not very smart, let them be quiet. They may come up with a great idea one day. They are mostly harmless. Now, I'll be honest, I'm pretty certain these people were probably closer to the front line when the armies went into battle. Well, that's the brutality of that world, I guess. But they had no particular issue with these people. What they had problems with was the really diligent, not very smart people. The hard-working, busy people who weren't the brightest. And they tend to keep an organization busy with kind of silly stuff. Now, Moltke's suggestion is you take them out. Again, I guess if you're the Field Marshal of the Prussian army at the end of the 19th century, then taking someone out was probably very simple. But HR these days don't allow us to do that sort of thing. Much as we occasionally would like to do that to one of our colleagues, you kind of have to work with them or work around them, I think is the key. But more interestingly is the right-hand side of this. It's the identification that hard-working, smart people are great. They're really great. But in Moltke's terms, you deploy these into staff function. They will make sure all detail is thoughtfully addressed. But they're not your leaders. Your leaders are people who combine laziness with intelligence. And he says promote these people to the leaders because they will know how to be successful through the most efficient deployment of resources. And I think that's where project managers and where we all should aspire to be, because a world of working smarter and not harder is a really good world, because it brings about the ability to achieve, to make successful activities delivered to the organization. It's all about a great work-life balance. Anything else is really quite challenging and quite stressful. And that's one of the things I try and aim to do, is to bring about this. And it's something I talk a lot about, and I run workshops and training sessions on, coaching on, is this ability to focus on what's really important and to be successful as a result of that. There is this concept of busy, and it's like, well, that's great, but I mean, we see so many people who are constantly busy, but are they actually achieving anything? And I think in the world of the assistant, the personal and executive assistant, it is such a critical role. It's such a pivotal role in an organization that you guys really do need to be successful in the most efficient way possible. And that's really what the idea around the lazy project manager is, the idea around this kind of productive laziness, this idea of effectiveness. It's all about that. And I think it's, in anything you do, particularly in the area of projects, the ability to work in this intelligent way, as Moltke puts it, is critical. And I think it will bring about, allow you to come deliver greater success in the future. So something to think about there.
So there you have it, project management for assistants. I hope it has been some value to you, that even if you got one thing out of it, that's my work is good, my work is done. So I'm delighted to share with you. If you have some further thoughts around your world and projects and project management, then please reach out to me. You can get hold of me and connect to me on LinkedIn, or you can contact me at my website, which is www.thelazyprojectmanager.com. Thank you, and be lazy.